Alright guys, so this is your flip video for water supply and distribution. So the first question is, where is the water? So where do you think all of our water is, or how much of our Earth do you think is water? You should already know that. It's about 70%, and it's actually 71% to be exact. So if you want to write that underneath your blank, where you put 70%, make sure you put 71% as the actual percentage. It's pretty interesting. What do you notice about the lakes of Georgia? They all pretty much stem from the rivers, which is kind of cool. Why is water so important? You can put this on the back of your sheet below your diagram if you want to. We get energy from the rivers, transportation, irrigation, weathering, erosion, and deposition because it shapes our land, and also for drinking water. Okay, so almost all the water on Earth is salty. It is 97%, and that's from the oceans. And oceans have a salinity of about 3 or 4% of salt. So basically, if you take a molecule of salt water, 3 to 4% of it is going to be actual salt, which is kind of cool. Of the 3% that is fresh water, 76% is frozen and 23% is underground. So that actually only leaves 1%. That's left in, lakes and rivers and water vapor and things like that that we can actually use, and it goes through the water cycle and we can kind of recycle. So this is pretty much what an iceberg or a glacier looks like. So you'll see at the top it looks really small, but really underneath it's all that fresh water is all frozen. So again, that was what, 76% is frozen, so that's pretty crazy. Your first question, where is most of the water in the world found? Is it underground, in the oceans, in the air, or frozen? It would actually be in the oceans. In what form is the majority of the world's fresh water? So think about fresh water, and what form is it? That would be D, frozen. From largest to smallest, the amounts of water on Earth are what? And that is salt water, solid fresh water because it's frozen, and then liquid fresh water. Alright, so the water cycle. This is kind of a picture of it. We are going to be labeling that diagram on the back of your sheet momentarily. So this is kind of what it will look like at the end when you write all your words down. There's 3 phases or states of matter. So make sure you know this, that water can be solid, a liquid, or a gas. And it takes the form of pretty much 2 of these most of the time during the water cycle, but sometimes it can become solid during the water cycle too. This is a continuous movement of water through Earth's atmosphere and ground, so it never stops, it's always happening. And the water cycle is driven or powered by the sun, so without the sun, we would not have that water cycle, so that's very important that we have that there. So here are about 9 things that you need to label on the back. We're going to label also the water cycle too, so you might want to use 2 different colors, one for these 9 words and one for the other words that will go along with the water cycle. So you need to think to yourself, where do you think runoff would be? That would be right there coming down the hill or mountain. The lake is right over here. Groundwater would be way underneath the ground. The river is actually coming down the hill as well. The ocean is that big body of water. The plants are, of course, the green things. The clouds are up in the air. The hill and mountain is right there. And then water vapor is in the air. Okay, so make sure that the back of your sheet looks like this thus far. If you need to pause it, you can. All right, evaporation. This is the process when the sun heats up the water in rivers, lakes, and oceans and turns it into water vapor or gas, which goes into the atmosphere. So it actually starts out as liquid water. That's what you need to put in your blank, liquid water. And rain is actually always fresh water. Of course, we'll talk about acid rain, and we've talked about that before. And that's not really fresh, but for the most part, it is fresh water. Condensation is actually the opposite of evaporation. This is where water vapor cools as it rises in the air, and it actually makes clouds. We will do a lab later that kind of shows how to make a cloud in a jar, and you need some dust particles that can come from smoke or things like that in order for those molecules to kind of latch onto and actually make a cloud. Precipitation, hopefully you're pretty familiar with this. You probably have been for a couple of days now since it's been raining, but cloud particles get heavy enough and they fall to the ground as either rain, snow, sleet, or hail. So those are the 4 types. And for your information, fun fact of the day, most water molecules only spend about 10 days in the air before they fall back down as precipitation. Of course, it doesn't rain every 10 days on the dot, but for the most part, it'll come down. Surface runoff is also part of the water cycle. It says much of the precipitation runs off the surface and flows downhill into streams. Then it flows into larger streams, then rivers, and eventually flows back into the ocean. So yes, eventually that little water molecule will make it all the way to the ocean. Infiltration is also part of the water cycle. This is where rainwater soaks into the ground. Okay, it's also called percolation. We're not going to use that word. We're just going to use infiltration. Groundwater is what's made after infiltration, and some of the water remains underground. It's called groundwater. As the water infiltrates through the soil and rock layers, the water is actually filtered because it goes through this kind of aquifer type thing, and this would be the contained aquifer down here because it went through that clay and kind of, filtered itself, so now it's fresh water. Transpiration is basically just evaporation from plants. So plants absorb water from the soil, and then it moves through the roots and the stems and the leaves, and then it heats up, in the sun, and then it evaporates off of the leaves. This, of course, happens after photosynthesis. You'll learn about that in 7th grade. Okay, so to go ahead and flip on over to the back of your sheet, again, and we're going to label 5 more things of where the water cycle happens. The first one's evaporation, which again, this is where the liquid water turns into water vapor because it's heating up from the sun. So make sure you put number 1 over there, evaporation. Number 2 is transpiration, which is basically the same thing as evaporation. It just comes from plants. Runoff happens down the mountain. Precipitation comes down from clouds in the form of rain, sleet, snow, or hail. And condensation is when that water vapor cools and it makes clouds. So make sure you know all 5 of those things. Earth's water supply. So the total amount of water on Earth has actually not changed much since early in its history. The same water is cycled over and over, so the water you drink at lunch was probably drunk by a dinosaur millions of years ago. So it might gross you out, but it's actually kind of cool how we, recycle the water over and over again. All right, and the last thing for water conservation down at the bottom right-hand side of your notes, the United States actually has the highest per capita use of water, meaning that everybody in the U.S. On average uses more than any other country in the world. We use a lot. What do you think contamination is? So how do we pollute water? So give 3 examples in your notes. And how can we conserve water or save it? And give 3 examples in your notes. Make sure you have both of those things on your notes tomorrow. All right, just some other questions that will hopefully prepare you for a quiz later on this week. Which one word does not belong? So think about those. It would be melting. Which one word does not belong? That would be a solid, because all those have to do with liquid or vapor or things like that. Which one does not belong? That would be a solid again. What powers the water cycle? That would be the sun. At what point in the diagram is precipitation most likely taking place? That would be C, because it's coming down from the cloud. The cooling of water vapor leads first to what? Clouds. Precipitation can be in the form of what? A solid or a liquid. Which is closest to the process of evaporation? That is boiling, because it heats up. Blank is a process by which water moves through the atmosphere and back into Earth's surface. Well, you should know that. That is the water cycle, which is also known as the hydraulic cycle. In the water cycle, the sun's energy causes what? Evaporation. And water vapor is a gas. All right, hopefully you got all of your notes down. Make sure you get it. If you need to review this or pause at some certain slides that might help you a little bit more than others, but make sure you got it down, and I will see you tomorrow.